Namaste and greetings. I, Mahima Kapoor, researcher at IMPRI, Impact and Policy Research Institute, Prabhav एवं नीति अनुसंधान संस्थान, Nai Delhi, extend a warm welcome to you all to the IMPRI #Web Policy Talk. Today, we have gathered for a special talk on Rethinking the City as part of the series #Local Governance with Mr. Tikender Singh Panwar. This discussion is being organized by the IMPRI Center for Habitat, Urban and Regional Studies and delivered by Professor Pithamber R. Polsani. I feel privileged to introduce the moderator for the session, Mr. Tikender Singh Panwar. Sir is former Deputy Mayor Shimla. He is National Convener of NCU, National Coalition for Inclusive and Sustainable Urbanization, and visiting senior fellow at IMPRI. Being mayor of Shimla, he was able to create a vision with the development plan that speaks about inclusive growth, greater planned social infrastructure, and making not just the city, but the citizens resilient. A model for democratic decentralization was being developed by strengthening the ward sabhas and empowering the ward committees. He was also a member of the National Task Force in the country to review the 74th Constitution, which speaks about decentralized governance. Welcome, sir. I am honored to introduce the speaker, Professor Pithamber R. Polsani. Sir is a faculty member and presently the Dean at the School of Advanced Studies and Research, Srishti Manipal Institute of Art, Design and Technology in Bangalore, India. His education and work traverses diverse disciplines, including philosophy, education, technology management, literature, semiotics, media, psychoanalysis, art, and Spanish language. Synthesizing insights from multiple domains, his research addresses conceptual and practical problems in the realms of the history of design ideas, vernacular design, urbanism, and philosophies of urban design. Dr. Polsani has led learning academies for Royal Bank of Scotland and Nokia Siemens Network, established a virtual university at Satyam Computer Services, and taught at the University of Arizona, Bates College, and Delhi University. Some of his recent publications include Radical City, Imagining Possibilities for the Indian City, Shadows Without Bodies, How Was Modernism in India Art? From the Remnants of Reality, Art and Practice of Suresh Kumarji, The Image in a Fatal Kiss, Dali, Lacan, and the Puranayak, Representation. Like a lizard that junks its tail in distress, Homer Simpson is no Antigone, among others. We welcome you, sir. Now, I invite Mr. Panwar to take the proceedings further, and we look forward to an enriching deliberation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mahima, so much. And for heaven's sake, please don't repeat the introduction again, because this is a series that we've been running since long. #Local Governance. So you don't have to repeat, all that stuff. I'm really getting bored hearing all that again. And by the way, I was the deputy mayor, not the mayor of Shimla, just to correct you. Yeah, but thank you so much, and thank you for really giving that fantastic narration of and profile of Professor Pithamber. And thank you, Pithamber. I hope you won't mind if I call you just Pithamber, not Professor Pithamber.
Please call me Pithamber.
And thank you for joining us, because it's been really long that we've been chasing you, and finally we've been able to get you, but not in Bangalore, in US. And we know the time is almost, I think, 12 hours difference, so probably it's morning for you. So good morning. And of course, good evening to Indian participants. Yeah, so I think we really look forward for a very enriching presentation, and of course, discussion followed after that. So Pithamber, just tell you what we do is, because I'll just contextualize what we intend you to, delve on. And after that, we'll have a Q&A. There are participants who are here. I can see them. The number is definitely going to come up. And so the questions would be coming here on our screen also, because we go live on Facebook. So probably we'll get questions from the Facebook as well. So probably Mahima or Dr. Simi will help us out in doing that. So yeah, I think I mean, just to give those logistics part. Pithamber, I think we've been working since long on why we should rethink the city, and why the way and the forms in which the cities have been transformed or are in a form of transition. What I call is completely unsustainable. I mean, and we've seen this. We've seen how the pandemic struck, and especially Indian cities, they couldn't even hold our migrant people back for even 24 hours, and the people started walking back because they realized that if they stay back, they will starve to death staying there. So why are we just witnessing this this reverse migration? I mean, what is it? I mean, what is it that we really have to understand? I mean, why we have to rethink our cities? That's the first part. And along with that, I think what is also important is, because I remember one of my favorite poets. I mean, I've been quoting him several times, and that is T.B. Shelley. I mean, 200 years ago, he wrote, "Hell is a city much like London." And actually, if you see our cities and towns, the way we have actually developed in the last 3 decades, particularly, because I just finished writing an essay on the affordable rental housing scheme, and I was trying to bring in this comparison, between the old townships, which were considered to be new townships. For example, Nangal, I pointed out Nangal. I mean, even today, if you go to Nangal, which is in Punjab, I mean, where the Bakhla Bias Management Board and Punjab Alkalis and National Fertilizer, every worker had a house, every worker. Until date, the workers still, I mean, the people still use those places. But fast forward to 90s and the post 90s, we see, I mean, we have seen those dramatic changes, not just in the economic profile of the country, but also in the cities. And I mean, why I'm so obsessed with housing, I think this is one of the key areas. If we have to ensure a decent living in the cities, and apart from that, the kind of informality that has increased. So I think the ambit is huge, Pithamber. I mean, I don't want to restrict you to speak just on housing, because typologies is another question that has erupted recently. Whether the kind of typologies we have been advocating recently, will they survive? The kind of large glass capital kind of stuff that we have used, and you come to Gurgaon, to Noida, and all that glassware. So whether these typologies will, so I mean, the canvas is huge, vast, and I know you've been running studios in your campus. So treat it as a studio and probably just take your time. And so why should we rethink the city? I think that's very important. And just to tell our people, our participants, Pithamber and I actually, we were together in the Radical City conference where this book, the fascinating book that has come out, and I mean, it's not that I'm promoting the book, but yeah, I think one should go through that. I mean, because it is quite contextualized in the Indian context. So Pithamber, over to you. Please go ahead.
Tikender, thank you very much. First, I must start by apologizing for being so difficult, to schedule this. We have been discussing about this for the last several months. But anyway, eventually I said that unless I fix on a date and a time, that this will never work out. So as you said, that I'm in the US, and then I think it's morning, and it's an ideal time to join this conversation. And secondly, I want to thank you, obviously, for inviting me, and as well as everyone at IMPRI, Arjun, Simi, and Mahima, who done a wonderful introduction. I mean, and for being extremely, forthcoming and setting it up, setting up this talk. So I have not prepared a presentation, because I thought that it's better that we have a conversation, because we have not had any kind of a definitive rethinking has not happened. I mean, definitely not by me, nor I don't see, I mean, among the literature that's coming up, that we have really reached a point where we can say that there is a way forward for the cities. But what I want to focus on, you raised several questions. Firstly, to begin with, what is the need for rethinking the city? And secondly, you touched upon For example, the company towns that were built in the 1950s and 60s, Nangal, that Yurus, and there were several others that were built, that what happened in immediate aftermath of independence, and what kind of challenges that the Indian government faced and how they were responded to, because there was tremendous amount of pressure on the government in order to accommodate and also they transform the society. And number three, the question of housing becomes really important, because especially since it has disappeared actually from the policy of the government, that is the need for providing the housing, because it has moved under the neoliberalism into the realm of the private hands. So we'll pick up, and then we'll take out the threads, and then you can interrupt me at any point of time and ask me questions, and then I'll also invite the other colleagues who are there to stop me and then ask questions. So I believe, and then this was brought out, and then this was the intention behind our conference on Radical City, and as well as the book, that there are two important factors that actually force us to rethink about the city as a construct and as a space of habitation. Number one is that the modern city and modern city planning emerges in the early part of the 20th century, especially with the founding and as well as very, very active participation of the Congress of the International Architects. CIAM, it's called. It's the French acronym. And for example, Corbusier and various other people were extremely active, both in founding of CIAM as well as in its several meetings. So the city that was conceived to be the modern city, which is divided into various demarcated zones of activity. So there were 4 that were identified by the CIAM in the reports. So you have, and which are connected to what we call what they defined as the human activities. So we live, so you have a housing, that is habitation where people live. Second, we work, okay, so there is a space for working. And the number 3 is that there is recreation. So therefore, there is space for recreation. And the number 4 is the transportation. That is, how do you move people from one zone to the other? So you have 3 demarcated zones: zone of work, zone of habitation, zone of living, and zone of recreation. And how do you meet people between these zones? So this idea of the city takes root, very deeply from the early 20th century onwards. Many of the architects, many of the planners, urban planners, in fact, urbanism or urban planning as a discipline emerges around this time. Okay, that does not mean that the urban planning did not exist, that the people did not plan the cities, people did not. Historically, every civilization, every society has developed cities. But urban planning as a self-conscious discipline, self-conscious activity, has its roots in CIAM, and then it emerges. Obviously, it goes a little before in early part of the 19th century, in later part of the 19th century, but it's in early part of the 20th century with CIAM that it becomes. So you have this zoned city and transportation as the means, the principal objective of connecting different kinds of zones. So therefore, the city is looked at as infrastructure. And the city as an infrastructure, I think, obviously disregards and disregarded actual inhabitants who live in the city. Okay. The second reason, and I'll come back to the first one and elaborating a little more. The second reason, I think, the biggest challenge that we are facing is global warming. Okay. So it's going to be, and as recent reports have come, the UN report that has just been published, and then earlier ones that have come about in last couple of years, where they say that the scientists, climatologists are rethinking reevaluating their data, because such a precipitous downfall that we are looking at in terms of the in terms of the global weather and then the changes in the weather, this global warming is going to be one of the major challenges to the city. So given these two things, one, there is a end of a paradigm that we have reached, end of a paradigm of modern city as it was conceived in the early part of the 20th century. And then the second thing is that we have a huge global warming and the consequences, dramatic consequences of the global warming that are looming on the horizon. And it's absolutely essential for us to rethink the city, because the city has become the major space of bringing together people, and especially in countries like China, India, Africa, after several countries of Africa, that the city is the place where the migration is taking place. City has become the place where there are opportunities. So there is a huge pressure on the cities. And then the cities, as they were conceived, I don't think that they would be able to live up to the challenges that are coming.
Okay, Dama.
Yes.
Yeah, I think go ahead, please.
Yeah. Okay. So why we need to rethink? I mean, in the sense that how can we rethink about this city? I mean, nobody has a definitive answer. I don't have definitely, but there are some models that are available, or we have to, if we have to break through this paradigm of CM that was established, of the modern city, of a zoned city, of a city that has been looked at purely from an infrastructural perspective. It is important that we need to question and rethink the philosophical, the epistemological presuppositions of the modern city. Okay. So some models that are available, if you look at the pre-modern ways of thinking about it. Like, for example, a habitation. Let's take a simple thing. Habitation, it doesn't have to be a city. City is a much larger place. A habitation is a collective appropriation of space by a group of human beings. Okay. Now, this appropriation of the space also happens in other species that are there. The birds appropriate, or if you take great apes and various things, various animals, they tend to define their territory and appropriate. But it is the human beings who does a very self-conscious appropriation and transformation of that space into doing. So when that appropriation of that space that takes place, that particular space actually was symbolic of something. Okay, so in the pre-modern thinking, that there were interrelationship between human being as a body to the nature that is surrounded by the beings that are there and the cosmos, etc. So there was an analogous thinking that is related, interrelationship of it. So the city, if you go and look at the pre-modern literature, whether it could be in the Mesopotamia, how the Mesopotamians thought about it, or the Harappa and Mohenjo-daro, or Romans, Greeks, any part of it, they looked at this space of city or space of appropriation as a way of a symbolic representation of something. Okay, so therefore, the thinking that led to an understanding of this particular space and how one needs to have it and how this space needs to be conceived were driven by different kind of a thinking. But when we look at it purely from an infrastructural perspective, then we are actually excluding what actually happens in the city. Because city is not just infrastructure. City is people who live in the city. People, it is the bodies that move across the space. It is the bodies that labor. Okay, these are the bodies that laugh, that entertain, that walk, that traverse this space. But the infrastructure does not take into consideration that about the body that moves through the spaces, about the people that move through spaces. Obviously, when you talk about the people, then you also take into consideration of various kinds of economic strata that is there within the city and how. But if you look at it, the infrastructural perspective is more like that of a conveyor belt. Okay, our roads and highways, if you look at it, like for example, Delhi, the outer ring road or ring road, etc., these are simply like conveyor belts. And then each one of the individual, a car or a bicycle or a walking individual who is moving through that space is simply seen as an object that needs to be moved as rapidly as possible from one destination to the other. So what we have been reduced to, if you look at it, the experience in a modern city, that is you go out, you rush, you're actually, stay in 2 points at your home and your workspace or place of recreation, which includes shopping. What you try to do is that you rapidly move from one point to the other and rapidly try to come back. And you are completely, the individuals are isolated into their specific zones. And therefore, the notion of a common space in which all the people or the citizens of a city would interact is something that is not taught to. Instead, you're driven by a specific activity. That is, either you go for work, you perform work, and then you come back. You go for entertainment, and then you have the entertainment, and then you come back. So what happens in between? So we cannot be reduced simply to activity A, B, C, D. And human being is not a sum of just activities. It's much more than that. So therefore, that we have to abandon this whole paradigm of a zoned city, and we have to start rethinking. And especially if you come to the context of India, that the modern city was conceived.
Before we come to India,
yes.
Actually, I think
yes,
there's one aspect which probably requires more clarity, and that is, from the modernist prism, how we have been looking at cities is like it is an end to the shackles of feudalism. Okay, so feudalism finishes off. We have industrialization in the cities. People migrate to the cities. And then it's a kind of liberation paradigm. But down the line, I mean, if you see, it's not the way how it's not that linear. I mean, how things have happened, and now we find more complexities actually getting developed. And of course, when you speak about Indian cities, and for that matter, even in various other sections, the cities hardly remain to be the industrial hubs. I mean, so I think this aspect also, if you will just touch upon that, I mean, so that would be little clearer. Yeah.
Yeah. Yes. Absolutely. So it's very interesting that in the 1920s, Siam, I want to go back to the Siam, that the people who enthusiastically embraced the modern city planning, the zoned city and then etc., various things, were across the entire political spectrum. Okay, the avant-garde architects in Paris or in Netherlands, or the Soviet planners immediately after the Russian Revolution in Soviet Union, or the Germans, all of them, irrespective of whatever their political leaning is, they enthusiastically embraced this whole idea of a modern city. I'm not trying to turn and then put blame on the people, because in terms of the evolution of the ideas and transformation of ideas, we cannot be attributing blame to the people. But what you see, that there is an across this whole thinking that went across the entire political and ideological spectrum. Okay, so because they were all committed to this idea of a it's a linear progression. Okay, philosophically, it's Hegel and subsequently Marx who takes over from Hegelian thinking of the teleology of the march of the history towards its ultimate realization. Okay, in Hegel, it's a self-consciousness, coming to itself of its own realization. And then Marx takes over, and Marx also lays out this linear transformation and development of the human societies. Okay, but our experience subsequently has been saying that no, this linear transformation does not take place. That is, the humanity is not, moving from kind of a evolutionary way. Okay, because you see that these evolutionary transformation, because in the evolution of life, you see from a primitive form to a more evolved and complex forms that you do it. It's a kind of so Darwinian, the theory of evolution, which gets applied to the social transformations. Okay, but that's not the case, as you have rightly pointed out, saying that is not the case. That is, no stage is incomplete. Okay, it is only incomplete only from a particular kind of a perspective. If you say that there is a goal or a destiny to which all humanity is striving towards. And so therefore, along with that, when I said that we need to really question the philosophical presuppositions, then we need to question this thinking as well of this continuous transformations that take place in time. And then whole humanity is moving in the same direction. If you take that thinking into account, that the West will always be ahead of everybody else, isn't it? Because they're supposed to have reached a higher, more advanced form in this trajectory. So the rest of the countries, that is the colonial, those who are colonized, post-colonial countries, will always be short of that. And that's a fundamentally a wrong understanding of it.
Okay, now to Indian cities, I think.
Okay. So,
yeah, please go ahead. Well, Marx never said it will be a linear progression, by the way. Anyway, and I just don't want to contest that.
No,
yeah,
we can say, we'll probably have another conversation about
true.
What happens in Marx, and then how Hegelianism transforms in Marx.
Please,
okay. So one thing we have to be saying that when we say that somebody or some thinker, great thinker, philosopher, and then etc. got some part of it is wrong in hindsight, that we are saying that we are not attributing any kind of, because you cannot expect any human being, however brilliant they may be, to get everything right.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Because they're not. Yeah. So what happens is that we have taken over, because of the colonialism, that we have taken over this entire modern paradigm of city building and implanted within India. Okay, and not only in India, it has happened in Brazil, it has happened in Africa, it has happened in many parts of India. So it's not trying to pose Western versus Eastern or that kind of a dichotomy and contradiction. That's not my point. It's saying that it's a Western thinking, and then we are from we are Indians, so obviously we cannot do it. And this is not against West. Why I say is that because each particular point of view is rooted in the experience of that particular people. Okay, so if particular ideas emerge within the Western society, they are rooted in their historical experiences of those societies, and how different kinds of ideas emerge, debated, and some become hegemonic. Now, what is happening in the post-colonial countries is it because of colonialism? Is it because of how our whole imagination gets reshaped? Is that we tend to ignore the fundamental experience of Indian society. And I'm using India in a very loose way, because we cannot have common experiences even within the Indian subcontinent across, because as all of us know that experiences differ. You travel 200 kilometers and then it's very different. But I'm using it in a very generic and a general way. So it's important. If you look at our education, if you look at how our planners get educated, our architects got educated, etc., it's all rooted, even today, the books that are read and then the kind of an approaches that are taken in the architectural schools, in the urban planning programs, in urban design programs, they're all very, very deeply rooted within the Western thinking. Okay, as I've said, I don't have anything against the Western thinking, but it is rooted in that, it is appropriate for them because it is rooted in the experience of the people of a particular thing. And it's important for us to understand and evolve what are our experiences. Okay, how do we do that? Let me just give an example of one thing. If you take a street, very simple example. If you take a street in India, it's not just a simple conduit for movement of vehicles and goods. Okay, street is a public space and it is shared by many people, different people who are engaged in different kinds of activities. But our street design in India, modern street design, still follows this idea that the street is simply a space for moving people and goods in their respective vehicles or automobiles from point A to point B. As a result, what happens is that our way of living is not that. So therefore, you see, I mean, there is this lovely picture that is there as a part of your background. You can see the city with so many people on that. I think probably I'm assuming that it's Delhi. You can see so many people on that. People are walking, people are vehicles, everybody is sharing that space.
Mahima, is it Delhi or somewhere? I don't know where they got the picture from. Anyway, yeah.
So,
Pithamber, there's something just, banging my head, and I think I should just point that out here, because when you speak about Indian cities, I don't want to be generic, but I mean, very specifically, let me just point out, take for example, Delhi. I mean, as you rightly pointed out, that post-independence, I mean, we had that Nehruvian model, and that's how the city. But you know, some 300 years ago, 350 years ago, Shahjahanabad, which is the old Delhi, existed. It still exists. Yes. And I'm telling you, Pithamber, you go to that place, and the moment you enter, you find there's, the temperature is almost 4 to 5 degrees lesser than the other parts of Delhi. So we have that Delhi also. Then we have the so-called unauthorized, the land pooling area that has come up now. And then we have Lutyens Delhi also. So isn't it very complex when we talk about Indian cities? Because we tried to copy this model. We didn't realize that already there was something existing. And so when we speak of rethinking, what should be the way forward? I mean, just to understand more of that. Yeah.
No, Tikender, you have rightly pointed out that no rethinking can be common to every city or every town in India, because each one is, I mean, that's where I think it's so fascinating, isn't it? That in India, that you cannot come up with generic models that would work. But what we have been doing all this time in last 75 years or 80 years is actually using the generic model and trying to impose everywhere, irrespective of where you are, whether you're in the hills, whether you're in the plains or on Deccan Plateau. Okay, irrespective of any, whatever it may be, that we are actually trying to implement one single model. So therefore, for us, in the context of Indian cities, when we start about the rethinking, this rethinking cannot be a generic rethinking concept. It has to be specifically context driven. Okay, it has to be highly contextualized to every response. And you pointed out Delhi's essence. Within Delhi itself, do you think that one solution would work, can be implemented across the entire space of Delhi? I don't think so. And I would say the same thing, venture to say the same thing to rest of the cities as well. You know, in India, that no single model can be implemented and across. But how the question would be saying that before we can even think about the models, before even we can think about the possibility of rethinking, there has to be a lot of groundwork has to be done, saying that how do we understand the dynamics of the Indian city? these attempts were made earlier in the Western things. I mean, I'll come back to that because we need to learn from there. Like, for example, Kevin Lynch, the American urban planner, etc. He tried to understand, for example, the image of a city. That's the book that he had published. He actually tried to see how citizens see the city. So he interviewed people in Boston. Boston was the focus. He interviewed large number of people in terms of how do they conceive the city, understand the city. One is the planner's view of the city that you have, or city policy driven or the governance driven kind of a view. But how does the habitants look at the city? So it's important for us to be able to understand actually how the dynamics of the space, how people negotiate space of the city, and how can we facilitate various kinds of activities that take place on that. As I was saying earlier about the street, that we still design the street as simply a straightforward street for the vehicles to move and the pedestrians to do that, if there is a pedestrian thing. In many places, we don't know that, we don't even care for the pedestrians. It's only the cars and the automobiles that have to move. But we have never accommodated hawkers on the street, street vendors. They are part of our reality. But tell me, which street design accommodates hawkers? Which street design accommodates the street vendors? But they provide enormous amount of service to the citizens, enormous amount of service to people. If you take them out, you have lost the entire dynamism of it. Instead, our approach has been, oh, this is crowded, and therefore we need to expand. The roads have become constrained, so we just keep expanding.
Beautification is another buzzword, yeah.
Beautification, yeah. Oh, absolutely. Beautification, again, it's rooted in the whole notion of a garden city, again, in the Western experiences. And on the beautification, I'll just pause to say that what I call that is poverty of imagination. We have a tremendous amount of poverty of imagination. Our politicians always are dreaming in Singapore. Every chief minister in South India, at least, North India, I think that it's not big at the same. Either it be Chandrababu Naidu or whether it is the SM Krishna, chief minister, whatever it is, everybody threatens to convert their city into Singapore. Okay, Chandrababu Naidu came and said that I'm going to turn Hyderabad into Singapore. SM Krishna said that but why are you dreaming in Singapore? So we can't even imagine other possibilities. We seem to be so constrained that we have even surrendered the possibility of imagining in a different ways.
Last question, from my side, and then probably Arjun and Simi Mahima will take over. If not this model, Pithamber, because we've seen this top-bottom planning, and recently I ran a series on the Delhi master plan. What a criminal act it is. Just 3 webinars, you don't even consider going back to the people, at least asking them. And the master plan 2041 will be ready before us. Well, if not this, then what models needs to be tested, okay, for more sustainable, or like you said, when we design, why can't we just take some very simple small things into consideration? But that goes back to the generic question of the processes of planning. So, if not this, then how should we rethink? What should we be rethinking about that? And maybe we can't do, but at least we can just have that engagement. At least engage with people and say, hey, this is not the way. This will further alienate the people. If you want the people to be part and parcel of their future in the cities, then I think things have to be thought of again. So, the entire process of rethinking. What is it that you would like to point out?
So that's a really large question, but I'll try to be as brief as possible. Okay, because there need to be a complete transformation across the board. From the very idea of design to all the way to policy and planning and various other things that are there. Let me just come close to what I am more familiar with that. design, whether it is urban design, architecture, or all these are part of the design. As I say, that design is a discipline with solutions in search of problems. Okay, so what happens is that
come again, Pithamber. Design is a
so
solution.
design is a discipline with solutions in search of problems. Okay, so what it was supposed to be is that understand the problem and come up with the solutions. But instead, design already has a solution. What I mean by is that a designer enters space with a solution mindset. And now I already have, so if I have solution is my goal, then I have to go and find problems. Isn't it? So if you look at architectural studios in the architectural,
it's quite the inverse actually. It's the inverse.
Yeah, that's right. That's what I'm saying. That's what I'm playing with the ideas. In the design is a discipline with solutions in search of problems. Okay. So what happens? Again, it's not directed to any individual or these things. People should not take offense, because it's important for us to rethink our own presuppositions. Only then we can really radically take the leap that is necessary for us for a paradigmatic shift in that. So a typical architectural studio or urban planning studio, what happens is that they define a context. Let's say Chandni Chowk is a context. So you have this group of 10, 12, 20 young and enthusiastic people led by a teacher. They would come, and then they have already come up with this idea that we have solutions. Now we have to change this space. So therefore, they don't come with an idea. So therefore, they come up with all kinds of, I sat in many juries of this thing, evaluating the students' work. So they always say, okay, I found these problems and here is the solution that I have. So the solution mindset has already set, so predefines what the space is there. Maybe everything is working very well. Maybe you don't need to intervene at all. Maybe in some space, you just simply need public toilets. Okay, you don't need to change the space, because life goes on, and there are ways in which there is a tremendous amount of energy, within the Indian cities, and then the way the Indians negotiate the space and how we traverse through that and find our own place. And people are finding solutions. People are finding solutions for all kinds of challenges that they're placing in space. Both the people who are there, the commerce that is there, people who go to do shopping, people who live there, all kinds of people tend to interact and then do it. But instead, what we do, as you had said before, we want to beautify it. Beautification is nothing but actually eliminating what you consider to be unwanted people. The street hawker, the beggar who will come there, and the workers who will come there, you want to actually eliminate them and push them further and further into the margins.
Great, thank you. And Pithamber, just to point out, I mean, we've seen some of these beautification projects, and Chandni Chowk is a classical. It's the latest one, by the way. I don't want to go to our own Venice. Why I called Varanasi Venice? Because it submerged recently in flood, and so did Chandni Chowk. That's the beautification we've done, yeah. So yeah. So thank you so much for, and Arjun, if you're there, Simiam, you can just take over.
Thank you, Tikender sir, and thank you, Professor Pithamber. It was wonderful listening to you and learning new paradigms actually, and gaining a lot from you. Thank you so much for the presentation. Actually, I have a very curious question. Forgive me if it is very naive, but when the lockdown was imposed, we saw so many migrants walking down and moving away from the cities, basically, meaning to say that the cities couldn't offer them the space which they wanted to claim as theirs, as having contributed, as being contributors to making or building of those cities. So it was an emotional and a psychological effect that the cities provided, negative effect, sorry, that the cities provided to a large number of population. So on the one hand, we are seeing, or we are claiming, that cities are engines of growth, and all those buzz phrases, and also it has been one of the humankind's greatest achievements in building the cities. A lot of progress and prosperity has come through the cities, that cannot be denied. But this kind of a backward movement, I mean reverse movement of the citizens of our country, for example, it shows some of the greatest injustices that the cities have given out or meted to its own population. So initially, or even you pointed out to the beautiful picture, we have those who are living in the cities, they are now accustomed to living in close proximity to one another, and this can be this is not really the case in the rural areas, and people have their spaces. I mean, I'm just generalizing, which may also not be true, but this COVID and pandemic has shown that we don't need cities. We can all go to remote areas. We can all go to our own places from where we belong to, unless we really belong to cities. And it doesn't need people to be, economically grow or to economically prosper, because even when they were not there, the cities continued to prosper in some ways or the other. So do you think that we have cities and the city governments also, I mean, we cannot relinquish the idea of proper governance, which we want, and we rightly want, rather, that should they adjust and accommodate new changes like the pandemics, or even the unequivocal human-induced climate change, and different sorts of inequalities, gender inequalities to caste and class categories that are there. So if you could throw some light upon this, and this would really relieve me of this dilemma. Over to you.
I'm really glad that you asked this question about the migrants. Okay, so you're a policy institute, and then I do not claim to have read all the master plans of all the cities that are there, but I can fairly be certain that not even a single master plan of any city in India has taken into consideration the migrant laborers, because the migrant laborers are also part of the city, isn't it? They may be migratory, they may be there only for a certain period of time, but have they been their equal participant in the city? Are the migrants taken into consideration when the planning is being done? Master plans are being built. When the urban planning is taking place, we don't take into consideration. Do you look at it from women, gender? You raised the question. Do we see it from women's perspective of in terms of what does it mean? Because do women experience this space exactly in the same way as men do? No, they don't. Okay. Do children experience this space the same way as adults do it? They don't. But neither discipline of urban planning or urban design, nor the planning as at the policy level take into consideration the real people that they live. Neither they take gender as a perspective in order to understand planning, nor the immigrants, nor anyone that they are. We just see these as invisible populations, invisible populations that need not be taken into consideration at all. So therefore, what pandemic had done is actually brought into a really, really sharp relief and brought really to the urban habitants, and especially the upper middle class and middle class and etc. How dramatic, that the immigrant laborers emerged came to the fore. This pandemic allowed them to emerge up and say that, look, you have huge number of people who live in the city, who build your cities, but their needs, their accommodation in the sense that they're, living, etc., and all these things, none of that has been taken into consideration. Because where you have really eliminated human being as a part of the planning, and instead you simply look at it only from the perspective of infrastructure, then you'll continue to have these problems. Okay,
Right.
so therefore, again, connecting up to what Tikender had called, saying that this rethinking of the city, rethinking at the policy level, and then at the planning level, at the discipline level of the urban design and architecture, and all these things has to start across the board and taking into consideration various people that that are there in the space of the city in doing that. And obviously, and then there's another question that you've raised, I would like to address that, in terms of saying that the pandemic has shown, saying that, the things need not be concentrated in the city. Okay. Ironically, if you look at in the post-independent India, the government rhetoric, central government and as well as many state government rhetoric, has always focused on rural India. Okay, so if you look at the rhetoric, it seemed saying that all the resources were actually directed towards the development of rural India. But on the contrary, in reality, that all policy and resources were actually concentrated towards the development of the cities, urban centers, more than actually trying to allocate the resources or address the needs of the rural populations. So I think we need to change, in many levels.
Thank you for that response. And I am still left thinking whether we should prepare the cities for climate change, or we should be preparing the population living in the cities for climate change.
You see, one cannot be disassociated from the other, because the cities are spaces of people. Okay, city is not buildings and roads. City is people. Okay, so preparing the people, preparing the city in the sense that it cannot be done in abstraction. It has to be done with the people. So the way the cities are right now, and you can see that huge kind of problems that exist. Like, for example, some basic things of power and potable water, all those have become major challenges. We are not even able to address such basic needs that are necessary for the population. So we cannot, I think we should move away from thinking city in abstraction and people as separated from it as habitants. City is people.
Right.
I think that's fantastic.
Yes.
City is people. I mean, that points a new slogan for us. Yeah. Actually, city is people. I mean, what we used to say, Pithamber, is cities for people. But actually, here is another advancement. City is people. Yeah.
City is people. I mean, it is people who do this.
Absolutely.
People make that space possible.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not that somebody else has built something and then you go and put people as toys in that, in this thing. And saying that, no, city is people. It's nothing more than that. I mean, imagine a city that is without people. What will it be? There are cities like that. In China, there are a couple of films that have been made, fantastic films. There is a German filmmaker who made. So in China, they have built massive cities with everything. There are apartment complexes, there are stadiums, there is everything. But there is not even a single person who is living in those cities. Okay, but that's not a city. That is just simply structures, objects. The city is made by the people. And city is people.
Thank you.
Okay, Simi, I think we've already crossed the time. It's almost an hour.
Yes.
But I mean, we can go ahead if there are questions. I don't think Pithamber would mind that.
No, I wouldn't mind. If there are any questions, I would be very happy to.
Yes, I had a question, if you don't mind. So,
Yeah,
in
please.
light of this discussion, how far has the Smart Cities program uh, been how far has the program been, how successful in achieving urban transformation?
Okay. I mean, I really don't know the nitty-gritty of it, but I can look at it in terms of conceptually as a smart city. Okay. So the smart city was actually an invention of the technology companies. Okay. So they were looking for new opportunities where the technology can come and can be utilized. So it is in that context that the whole notion of the smart city that has come. And you have to ask the question, is the smart only intelligence from the perspective of technology, not intelligence from the perspective of people? Okay. And it is part of this neoliberal trend that has started about 30, 40 years back. Okay. So the life has changed in which we think that technology is solution to all the problems. Okay. So we assume that the traffic can be regulated because a particular kind of technological innovation will enable the traffic to move. Okay. But that's not, technology is not a solution to the problems. Okay. And the worship of technology has become a part of like kind of a mantra for everything, isn't it? That is technology. Like there is an app for everything, that we think that the technology is the solution for this thing. So probably we may have to create an app for cities, isn't it? They make cities turn them into smart. But instead of talking it as a smart cities, probably that the resources should have been used in terms of addressing some of the fundamental problems that the citizens face in the cities, either in terms of potable water, security for women. It's very, very important for how women are, women's right to city, okay, to be able to travel safely within the space of the city and move within the space of the city. How do you protect that? And then that would make city smarter, in a sense, more intelligent. That means we're using human intelligence in order to think about our own self.
Right, sir. Thank you.
Great. I think that's it, Dr. Simi.
Yes, sir.
Or do you have something?
Awesome.
Yeah.
No.
Arjun wants to make the last word.
Yes.
Yeah, please.
If I'm audible.
Yeah, you are.
Right. So coming from a global discourse, we also have Habitat 3. And right to the city was very much highlighted. And in the recent times, Indian government also is focusing on urban transformation. Actually, the name of the scheme is only urban transformation. We also have 15th Finance Commission also given record number of amount to the cities. Tikender sir has written a lot about it. In this right-based framework, as we are talking, how to move ahead. As an economic lever, we have something called universal basic income, because universal access to basic delivery of services is not taking us long. We have problem of slums, informal settlements. Do you see a universal basic income or any of that lever to be very inclusive, or what do you suggest as a way forward for making our cities more inclusive? And also I would like to congratulate for your new radical cities.
Thank you. So there are a couple of things that you have pointed out. One is in terms of the income. Okay. The other one is the notion of right to the city space. So let me just come to the income part of it and then address it. So the income part of it is not just limited to the cities. Okay. It has to do with again, a whole presuppositions of a particular kind of a system. Okay. Now, when the human beings come together, all societies imagine themselves of how they need to be. Okay. What does it mean to be a member of a society, of this human community? And what is the presuppositions on the basis of which that the entire network of relationships and organization takes place. Now, capitalism is based on a particular kind of presuppositions which does not allow that kind of a minimum, universal minimum income, etc. So what we need to replace that is with the securing of the livelihood. Okay. Does any of our policies or any of our approaches, economist approaches, does it start with from the idea saying that how do we secure the livelihood of all the members of the society? Okay. So when we put that to the forefront, then the thinking about the society, thinking about the economy, thinking about the relationships, thinking about the various kinds of structures would be very, very different than saying that the objective is to create a space where everybody is competing against everybody else. And whoever is smart enough, whoever is, entrepreneurial enough will win and will secure. And those who cannot are actually not entrepreneurial enough, who are not, are capable of winning. They cannot sell themselves. So therefore they failure. So you have winners and losers, successes and failures. So that's the whole question of saying, obviously. So if you're saying that we are guaranteeing minimum income and we are doing all these things, that means we are moving in the direction of saying that how do we secure the livelihood of the people, The second thing is that the right to the city, okay? And I would like to go back. When the city is people, then the question of right, city as a space, and then therefore I have a right to be here, becomes very, very different, okay? Because there is a complete inversion of the modern state, because the modern state emerges out of when the sovereignty shifts from the monarch to people, okay? That it is the people as the sovereign cannot talk in terms of having a right to something that exists. The right is already presupposed in that. So when we talk about right to city, we are actually probably making an emphasis in a wrong way. By saying that there is some kind of an abstract construct called city, or there is something that this particular kind of a space that we define as a city, and the citizens who live there, people who live there, have to continuously assert their right to being there. Okay, so so I think that also that we need to really rethink in those terms of it, and saying that how do we build a city, or how do we conceive the city as people? Therefore, it's not, the right is not something that I have to continuously, as a habitant of Delhi or Bangalore or Bombay or Mumbai, that I have to continuously keep asserting my right and keep demanding my right. But instead, that the city itself has to be taken into consideration, that that this right is already presupposed.
Can I ask
Yes.
a question?
Yes.
This is Mridu Leepan. I am from Center for Development Studies.
Yes, ma'am.
Trivandrum.
Please.
I'm an honorary fellow there now. I was like Dr. Simi, you were saying something which has been, troubling my head also. Now, when we are thinking of rethinking cities, we are obviously working on something which is already there. We are rethinking of a city which already exists, and which, to some extent, we can say we didn't plan properly initially, and therefore we are in a real mess, in a way, that we are now. Therefore, we really have to start rethinking about cities, because we have to make them inclusive. And I like the way you said that cities means people. I mean, that's what we want. We want people to be there. We don't want them to be shifted out from the cities, faraway places, and make it beautiful. So I am thoroughly agreeable with that. But now we want the slums to be there in a better position. We want the street hawkers to be there. We want all of them to be there. So the point is, how do we design that in a situation which is already given to you? You see, so is it a sort of, what is it called? Firefighting, okay, we have little space here, so maybe we have public toilets for all the, all the people who do not have toilets at home? Or can we improve the slums in situ? That is what became very popular, that we improve them where they are. We don't put people out. And I just wanted to tell you in this context that Kerala actually came up with a very wonderful housing scheme called Life Mission. I don't know whether you've heard of it, where actually it was thought that with the housing, we should also think of their livelihoods, think of their social security. So it was called Life, Livelihood, Inclusion, Financial Empowerment, Life. That was what the thing was. So the thought was to have a city where, you know, we could give houses to poor people with also livelihoods, with also some sort of social security. And of course, childcare and women to be given specific training. So this was one sort of a thing, but, you know, we are adding on. The point is, how do we decongest the city and make it still inclusive? You know what I mean? I'm for an inclusive city, but how do we do it on a situation where already the cities are what they are? So I don't know whether I've made myself clear, but this has been always in my head. You know, we talk of smart city, we talk of all that, but what do we mean by that? Are we going to get niches somewhere where we find some land and we say, okay, we can do this here? Mr. Dr. Professor Pithamber, are you? Did you get what
I got? No, absolutely. No, you're completely right in terms of this. So there are so many things. There are all so many interconnected things. And what has been our approach has been always been a piecemeal approach to a particular kind of problem. Slum is a problem, but why do we look at it only from the perspective of problem?
I'm not saying it's a problem.
No, not you. Not you. I'm not specifically directing about it, but in general, our thinking and approach in terms of it. We always look at everything from the perspective of the problem, and then therefore we have piecemeal solutions, as you rightly pointed out. But I think that this is a wonderful effort that you're talking about. Kerala government saying that how do you provide the livelihood? How do you get interconnected things? It's not simply a question of that. So decongestion of the cities, overpopulation in the cities and etc. Because economic opportunities for the people have been so limited. I mean, rural distress. I mean, I don't have to tell you from, any of the people who are present here, rural distress. We have been going through a rural distress for so many decades. And as I had mentioned that, we, in terms of our sloganeering and manifestos and talking about it, we talk in terms of it being, rural focused. That it looks like that, you're always focusing on farmers and then etc. and all those things. But in practice, that the rural areas have been under tremendous amount of distress, and as a result, that the people have been migrating to the cities as a way, because they feel that there are greater opportunities. At least they will be able to make even a minimal living livelihood in that. So decongestion has to have a really radical planning or planning approaches to planning, and overall, how we create opportunities, economic opportunities has to change completely. And as I said earlier, that we don't have each, like Kerala would present a very unique challenges, as Delhi would present a different kinds of challenges. So it has to be highly contextualized responses to these challenges that we face.
I agree with that. When I said decongestion, I also meant that, you see, we didn't plan properly, in the sense that you have, for instance, huge areas, allocated for, say, apartment buildings, So we didn't. So when I say decongestion, I didn't mean only that the population from rural areas is coming in and creating a problem. We didn't plan properly, but we were expecting these people to come, and the planning was not done properly. So naturally, they would be living in small houses. They would be living in slums. So that's how it happened. But if we had planned the thing properly, in the sense of how much land should be really allotted for, the better off sections to be able to build any number of apartments, even if they don't use them, that would have been a better thing to have done. And I just wanted to add something more. I know we are running out of time, I'm sorry, but Kerala has actually made provision for housing for migrant workers. I mean, that's another of our very interesting schemes, that we've got, these lot of sort of dormitory-like housing, which has been in areas where they are concentrated. There are few pockets in Kerala where they're concentrated. So that's another thing that we have done, realizing very much the problems of, but it was not part of the master plan originally. But again, it's an add-on, where you found some space. Okay, let's have a building for the migrant workers. So that, how does one do proper city planning, which is more, holistic rather than, you add on pieces. That's the sort of problem which worries me. We are not planning a new city completely. We are actually planning something with a city we already have. So that's the.
Okay, yeah, great. Pithamber, you want to add something to that? Yeah.
I just simply wanted to say this thing, that I agree that we do not take into consideration, like I had said before, that we do not take into consideration when we're planning our street, the street hawker, the street vendor, and everybody we take account. In the same way that when we look at the city master plans, you don't take migrant labor into account as a part of the master plan. You don't take into the entire domestic help that actually sustains the life in the city, and various other services that are provided by the huge number of people in the city. They're not taken into consideration at all, because they don't even consider. Earlier Arjun had asked, and I don't want to point out saying that, to right to the city, but there's a right to the city, but the street hawker also has a right to the city, isn't it? That this notion of right has to be expanded. We don't take these things into consideration at all.
Okay, great. Thank you. So, Pithamber, thank you so much. I think it was really lovely to have you here, and fascinating, I think. Simi, wasn't it? So I think with that, and the last word that I want to add is actually what we've been arguing is, when we say contextualizing, I think this is, if I have understood properly, is what Romy and people like him are also suggesting. That is, the planning has to be done quite in a contextualized form, and that the I won't say the local body, but yeah, it has to be quite decentralized and democratized in the sense, like what Mridul ma'am was pointing out. Kerala, I think, is experimenting some of those models. I don't know how successful those models will be. So, well, thank you so much, Pithamber, and I think we definitely require rethinking the city. And again, back to Mridul, because our cities are very complex. Right from Shahjahanabad to Lutyens and to the what I call the Modi Sheher. He's really revisiting the Central Vista. That's what I call the Modi Sheher, because that's the new Modi Sheher coming up. In Delhi, yeah. So that's the complexity which we all live. So thank you so much. I think it was wonderful, and we'll continue with this hashtag local governance series, just to discuss about alternatives, and the alternatives that we desperately require for our urban and for local governance. Thank you so much. Thank you, team.
Thank you,
Dr. Simi, of course, Pithamber once again. Mahima and Dr. Arjun, thank you so much for this.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
So we leave the discussion, or shall we? You can just put it off from the Facebook, because we need to discuss something more, or shall we do it on some other platform, Simi? What do you suggest?
So we can just stop it. Anshula,
stop it.
if you could just stop recording.